Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the third video of 5 looking at the new war spoiler weapons. There aren't any quest or lore spoilers in this video, but I would still recommend doing the new war first because you can't even access these weapons before doing so. They are also hidden rewards that can only be obtained from new bounties and cannot be traded. The only other way is buying with plat at the market, but again requires you to finish the quest. So if you don't want to be spoiled at all about these new weapons, click off the video now. I'll give you another second or two to do so. Else, let's get started. So I finally have all 3 new Archon melees. Previously I covered Neferi, the fire-breathing dual daggers that changed the weapon archetype forever. And by far the strongest ribbonless dual daggers in the game. They had some ridiculous gas and AoE heat inherent setups beyond just the conventional slash. I'll admit that video was pretty adventurous. Many of you have been asking me about if I would cover the Verdilac, Boreal's whip, next. Well, that's what we're doing today. For those of you who have played with this whip, I'm sure you already know what's coming. Honestly, now that I've played with all 3 of the Archon melees, I would say Neferi was the most game-changing. However, Verdilac just seems to be the best. This video is very long today, and that's because there's a ton of synergy and setups to show and explain. So pay attention, and let's take a closer look at the Verdilac. The Verdilac is our new first whip since Galvacord, I believe, but correct me if I'm wrong. And it has monstrous stats arriving with it. Just look at this, 30% base crit and a 2.5 multiplier. That's super high for a whip. Not only that, but it also has 21% status chance. Now, that's not a broken amount like some other melees have, but like all Archon melees, they have a unique perk. Even without the perk, this weapon is slash weighted, so this is viable even as an OG spin to win whip. Actually, let's pull our classic spin to win whip on the side right here. Atterax. Atterax pulls ahead in being 90% slash weighted, but the actual total base damage is only 129. Verdilac is nearly twice as high at 213. This massive base damage gap makes up for Verdilac being only 50% slash, making the overall slash dots pretty much equal. Atterax slashes 80% more often, and Verdilac does almost 80% more damage per bleed. However, if you're going to go raw damage route, such as corrosive, Verdilac will absolutely mop the floor due to the massively higher base damage. For crits and status, we basically see flipped crits, and identical status. Verdilac does have an extra 0.5 meter base range advantage at 3.0 instead of 2.5, but that's where the stat differences end. There is one problem with whips though, they generally have lower base damage compared to other melees because of their massive spin attack radius. Look at this 0.5 follow through stat. This is some of the worst you can get in Warframe. Basically, each enemy you hit after the first will take sequentially 50% less damage. First takes 100, second takes 50, third takes 25%, fourth takes 12.5, etc. This means at higher levels, whips can really struggle to apply meaningful slash procs, but this is where Verdilac stands apart. See, we haven't discussed its unique perk yet. If you block E combo, it will whip the floor extremely fast and then launch a horizontal wave out of the end of the whip towards your reticle. This projectile has innate toxin damage. It can also headshot. It also works with all normal melee mods, including Blood Rush, Weeping Wounds, Banes, crits, damage mods, even Condition Overload. And that's a rare quality that not many melees with unique perks can say they have. It also has the same base damage as the weapon itself at 213. It's also a horizontal wave that's extremely easy to fire at heads. You want to know what else? You can launch up to 3 of them in a row. And the first shot has a 400% stance value multiplier, meaning it does 4 times the damage of a normal swing. The second projectile has 200% and the third has 500%. And the most important part? It has 1.0 follow through, meaning every single enemy hit by this will take the same damage. The projectile has very little punch through, and it seems to be around 1 meter, so in most cases it will only punch through 2 bodies maximum. When it runs out of punch through, the shot will explode in a miniature AoE with equal damage to the hit itself. It has a maximum range of 35 meters, and I don't know the size of the AoE, but if I had to guess, it's about 2 to 3 meters. The projectile is also affected by Zephyr's Jetstream projectile flight speed buff, and let me tell you, you will see her later today. Finally, there is one last topic I wanted to go over in the mechanics. This deserves its own section because of how buggy and weird it is. This weapon's projectiles have multiplicative condition overload scaling, kind of like how certain guns have multiplicative gun CO scaling. Now what does this mean? It means that it works like Eclipse instead of X armor, a final damage multiplier which is way stronger than a base damage buff. Now how big is it exactly? That's the thing. For my testing, it appears to be a 80% extra total damage per status effect inflicted. Basically, using a primer makes CO match or even surpass Eclipse buffs on this weapon. It's ridiculously powerful. Here's a sample of my testing results, which I actually tested with build 3 on the Verdilac that I'm going to show you later today. I had 0 buffs active with 0 combo, and I was aiming at the abdomen of level 160 corrupted heavy gunners. I was far enough away to not hit them with a quick whip attack that occurs before the wave was launched. Feel free to test it yourself and tell me your results. My test may be flawed to some mechanic I'm unaware of, but it is pretty obvious that condition overload is massively overscaling on this weapon currently. Each of these builds today, I would strongly recommend running Nira for power spike because Verdilac is extremely reliant on being at 12x combo to make the most out of its stats. It is an extremely strong hybrid weapon, meaning it needs both status and crit scaling to shine. You can run other focus schools instead, but just keep in mind you will have to build a combo back up to 12 if it falls. A primer of dexterity can help for an extra 7.5 seconds if you want, but Nira will be an easy way out for those less pressure to focus on combo maintenance, as I would say this is just a very feel-good melee that would favor people that don't like to put as much effort into their rotations. So what happens when you combine headshots, proper melee combo scaling, nutty stance multipliers, 1.0 follow through, and some AoE? Well, I'm sure you can guess. We got 3 Verdilac builds today with a ton of frame synergy setups later on and multiple setups to test, so let's get started, shall we? Build number 1. This is a basic spin to win build. If you're looking for OG Atterax but better, this is what we have to play with now. If you don't want to use a primer, remove condition overload for prime pressure points. I know some of you spin to win Andes don't want to hit any keys except spinning around, but as a counter, take a look at this new mod, Nira's Contempt. If you actually use this mod or have it, I would recommend slotting Gladiator Might or Spring-Loaded Blade actually instead of prime pressure point, otherwise you can stick with that. But this mod is essentially prime pressure point on steroids. That set bonus of increased slam damage isn't correct. It currently works on normal damage too, so on this build with the full set bonus, it is acting like a 390% base damage mod, and it also provides 60% extra status on the side. The other 2 Nira mods, they are Warframe mods. Just keep in mind this isn't a proper Caliban build for the Verdilac. It's actually intended for the Quorum, so you have to wait for tomorrow for that video. But these 2 Nira mods offer extra health and duration, which is a very special mod I will make a video just for itself in the near future. And the other offers bullet jump and aim glide. If you're spin to winning, frame builds aren't as important except buffs that stick to you, so it is absolutely worth slapping these mods on your frame for a spin to win Verdilac build. For the later builds that are not spin to win, these are still worth slotting on your frame because condition overload on those builds works like Eclipse and will scale off of these mods as well. These mods are your base damage on Verdilac. Alright, back to the weapon. Blood Rush gets this weapon up to 162 crit chance, which is solid enough. If you run Gladiator Might and slot 1 instead of Spring-Loaded Blade, you'll be at 195 for nearly all oranges and some extra crit damage. Weeping Wounds pushes this weapon to 126% status chance for those nasty bleeds. Basically expect on average 1 slash proc on the enemy every other spin attack. Prime Smite to double dip the bleeds for 2.4 times more damage, Organ Shatter to scale the crit damage, Primed Reach to push this weapon up to 6 meters. It's nice and large on the spinning radius this way, and Prime Fury to make it more comfortable to slide around. While a base value of 1.0 is higher than 0.917 like Atterax, whips are not particularly fast to start with, and you will also want to stack this with Arcane Strike for another 60% attack speed. Testing time? I'm going to be using the build with Gladiator Might and slot 1. Well, let's just spin around and slap these corrupted heavy gunners. This is way tankier than most of the enemies, such as fodder, you will face in Steel Path, and spin attacks aren't particularly known for dealing with anything except trash mobs, but this weapon is in fact strong enough to do that, especially with the new mobs we've obtained, so let's see how it goes once we build up 12x combo. It works, I guess? It's nothing special, but it's nice to see that it will clear enemies decently in the open. This is pretty standard performance for a spin weapon. It's not really any better against grouped enemies because of the horrible follow through and the weapon already having a lot of radial to start with to make up for non-grouped enemies. Let's try again, but with condition overload instead. Well, as you can see, there isn't a massive difference. It does make things easier on your hands though since you aren't spinning as much, but the reason why you don't notice much damage changes is because condition overload on the normal spin is additive instead of Eclipse like the perk that I'll show later. Nira's Contempt and the set bonus is also already giving you 390% base damage, which is roughly equivalent to 5 status effects for Condition Overload. Shooting your Epitaph means you can't melee, and an Epitaph Primer, which is the radiation viral build I'm using here, only procs 4 status effects. Since you spend so much time meleeing, you also can't shoot as much and thus can't max out your viral stacks as well. A Panzer would help with this, but 4 status effects only gives you 320% additional base damage when you already have the 100% innate and 390 from Nira. You're going from 490% to 810% base damage, but spend nearly half the time shooting. The only reason it is even worth it is because you inflict viral stacks. I would say you do 2 to 5 viral stacks per enemy without Panzer, which is only about a 2.25 to 3.0 multiplier. But you spend half the time shooting Epitaph to do 1.65 times more raw base damage. So this 2.25 to 3.0 viral multiplier only slightly offsets it. The final effects? You do about 4 times more damage in the end. This is still a lot, but you spend half the time shooting. So this 4 times more damage is really only 2 times more damage, and it's nothing compared to what most people expect out of a primer setup where you add a shitload of elements and viral. Normally you'd expect to do over 10 times more damage when adding a primer into melee builds because you don't usually spam melee as much as you do on a spin to win, so there is an actual downtime window to prime that won't be a detriment to DPS. But this is also because of how strong the Nira set is now, which is probably going to squeeze onto almost every single melee build in the future. This means you're better off using ability buffs and helmets such as Roar and Eclipse. The primer is much diminished in this setup. Now let's look at the second build. The final 2 Verdilac builds focus on using the unique projectile wave passive it has. The funniest thing is all 3 of these builds only differ by the mod equipped in the bottom left corner. Otherwise, all 3 builds are the same, but they're used very differently. The key difference is by using the projectile wave, the build mechanics change completely. Condition Overload is now an Eclipse modifier and not a base damage modifier for the wave. This means priming is actually important for massively boosting your damage, and like I said, each status effect is an extra 80% final damage on this build. Nira still works as a 390% base damage in this scenario. The wave has innate Toxin, so adding Shocking Touch will make it pure corrosive damage. Remember, the wave itself has a hitbox that can clear everything in front of it before exploding in an AoE. This setup favors grouping enemies together, but it will also work on singular enemies. Essentially, this is a raw corrosive whip setup with an ace up its sleeve. Weeping Wounds is actually extremely important on projectile builds for Verdilac because the wave is pure Toxin at base, meaning it has no IPS. Weeping Wounds lets you surpass 100% status and guarantees you will proc whatever element you mod on the wave. And it will proc twice because of both the hit and explosion. Prime Smite doesn't double dip here since we're going raw damage, but it is still narrowly best in slot. If you don't want to run it, I would suggest Gladiator Might. The rest of the build still holds true since the projectile wave takes mods normally. You will still be able to crit, scale the crits hard, and be fast. Now, this works on any build, but we're going to stick to Caliban for the showcase. This is not the highlight of the video, but I want to show you what a basic corrosive whip projectile looks like. I'm at 12x combo already here. You basically look at an enemy, use the block E combo. You will hit an area directly in front of you before launching the wave. It doesn't have much range, but it will add to and refresh your combo counter if it connects, as the wave projectile does not. This is an easy way to keep your combo counter up if you want to use it this way, but it does require you to be a little bit closer to your enemies. The projectile itself has a taller hitbox than what the razor-thin frisbee implies, so I would recommend launching it just above the heads to improve your odds of landing a headshot, as this weapon does have headshot multipliers. Magus Anomaly would help a lot with grouping enemies together because you don't really need tight grouping or a lot of setup for this weapon. You just want to be able to hit more enemies as you can. There's one issue with this weapon though. The lack of punch through severely limits its firepower because each enemy behind the first will only get hit with the explosion. This means all of your damage is packed into one single hit and is front loaded on the crowd. There also seems to be some weird buggy line of sight check that should not be present on AoEs. This has been happening on most of the AoE additions to the game recently. Sentient Wrath has this problem. Korm's AoE I'm gonna highlight tomorrow also has this problem. But what if there was a way around this? Enter the third build. This is a gas build. This solves the punch through issue. Yes, I know gas, but the reason why we're going gas is because every enemy hit will contribute AoE damage to everything else around it. So instead of hitting 2 enemies once with explosion on corrosive, you will now hit 10 enemies with gas, and all 10 enemies will hit each other with their own clouds, doing 10 times more damage. Now we know gas doesn't scale with elements, but we do have the Eclipse scaling mechanic I didn't even showcase for the corrosive setup for Condition Overload. And we also have access to ability synergies that will feature here. The one synergy that will work on no matter which frame you pick with Anomaly, Sickening Pulse. It will max out any gas stack to 10. So if you hit 1, 2, or 3 gas stacks, it will become 10 on this build. And as you saw in the preview a couple seconds ago, more damage would be pretty nuts. Once again, the only thing we have done is replace the bottom left mod for Volcanic Edge, as the projectile has innate Toxin. This makes it pure gas, and with being above 100% status from Weeping like I said, we are guaranteed to proc gas on every single enemy we hit. Remember Ambassador Showcase that kept cropping in my videos recently with the 6 meter AoE and 100% status pure electric shot? Yeah, this is the same thing, except it's scaling off much more OP melee mods. I don't think I need to explain this build more since it's identical to the corrosive one, except being gas. So let's skip to the basic showcase. No buffs, no priming, just 12x combo. One single throw and they're dead. That's how strong gas is on this whip. And remember, we can throw up to 3 projectiles in the combo. So let's try it again. Instant death. While the first hit had a 400% multiplier, combining this with a 200% and a 500% on the final hit is just too strong. 1100 multiply thrown at all of them in less than 2 seconds, and AoE with no follow through. I don't think the third hit actually even managed to hit everything because they were already dead. How does it handle against single enemies? Nowhere as good. It can barely kill after 6 ticks from gas of a single hit. But you can go through the full triple swing combo and it will delete them after 2 or 3 ticks. This is a build that's meant for grouping, but you don't need tight grouping. Magus Anomaly is the best option for keeping your build super dynamic and your helmet slot open since the setup is fast. Combining this with armor strip abilities would be insane. But let's step it up a notch. How about using a primer? Our Epitaph. It's the same build from earlier. Well, that's not even surprising. They basically die on contact. A few lived for a single tick, but that was a 35k gas tick. 35,000, and a ton of them. And we still haven't brought buffs into play against level 160 corrupted heavy gunners with full armor. Let's see it again. Ah yes, so nice seeing everything die like that. Now what if we use Roar, which I have on this Caliban? Gas ticks of 60 to 70,000 now, and this is a roar with just a 62% multiplier only. These clouds also linger, so even after you kill them, technically you can drag more enemies with Anomaly into them, which will still carry the massively inflated tick damage from the Eclipse CO and overlapping clouds. Your enemies will only be missing the viral stacks that makes them more vulnerable, but they will still die. So let's look at some broken synergies now, shall we? First up is obvious, Zephyr. I don't want to get too much into details about these builds today since most of you already know how Zephyr works and there are a few to get through. Basically, strength isn't that important. You can build some if you want to speed up the projectile the Verdilac with Jetstream and pull enemies closer to tornadoes to be sucked up earlier with air burst, but think of this build as a concept rather than an actual copy paste for you to use. Zephyr turns the mini AoE into a 10 meter radius per tornado nuke. And because you have 4 tornadoes, you're probably spreading this into, say, a 20 meter radius around you. Shooting into one tornado can fuel all other tornadoes. Everything hates it, and everything will die. You just find a place to camp. This build doesn't have rolling guard, but if you keep turbulence up and pay attention to brief respite, this honestly shouldn't really be a problem. If you really want it though, drop Augur Reach for rolling guard. Any of your abilities will instantly remax your shields, even air burst, so long as you have a Decay Dragon key on. Gyze to get the energy economy up, and Strike to launch projectiles even faster. Roar for token damage buff. Use whatever helmet you want, it doesn't matter. Now let's spawn in some victims. Hold caster 4 if you're on default settings to lock them in place. Occasionally shoot into the tornado with Epitaph to prime everything. Throw your Verdilac in there. Look, they died instantly on contact, and I had 0 combo built up. So let's try this again with an actual 12x combo. Oh look, everything is dead instantly. You basically have created a hallway nuke that will one-shot anything that gets remotely close to you. I haven't even casted Roar yet. Actually, there are other synergies too. For grounded enemies, you could Anomaly them and Breach Surge them for the stealth multiplier. Then throw your Verdilac for an extra 800% base damage, on top of the 490% you're already getting, as well as those crazy surge sparks arcing between enemies getting destroyed by the gas procs. Every single gas tick can proc a surge spark, and because they overlap in an AoE, you bet you'll have sparks everywhere if enemies somehow survive the first tick. I don't think I need to give you a Wisp build for this. Literally any kind of breach surge build with positive strength will cause this to happen. You don't even need setup. It's just cast breach surge and throw Verdilac. Make sure to put both Nira mods on her though. Okay, how about who's next? Vauban. Here you go, a non-helmet Vauban. This is actually for the Quorum video, but it works well enough for Verdilac as well. So basically, a Bastille build with decent stats. Brief Respite will keep you alive easily. You don't need Rolling Guard because of Bastille, which full strips in 5 seconds on this setup. You don't need to suck everything up, but if you do, they're also dead. This build is basically invincible. Enemies become full stripped, which we saw was completely unnecessary for Verdilac to kill. And they also become completely immobilized. It makes a joke of level cap enemies. You have Bastille up, you spam Anomaly to get them in the middle, and Verdilac them, and that's it. Vortex can do the same as well if you want to do that route. If you go the Vortex though, with no strip, you will want to be on 12x combo. Bastille will kill them even with no combo whatsoever due to full strip. If you're wondering if you can strip while Vortex is up though, no, Bastille requires them to be held up, so do not combine the two. Either pick to be using the Bastille or Vortex, or adapt to whichever one is currently up. Now how about Nidus? Well, there is no build I'm showing for this, but I want to explain the concept I have in the past. Projectile AoEs like Verdilac hates ragdoll hitboxes. Hitscan AoE works wonders with it though, due to hitbox issues making them gain extra hits, like Moslon's primary fire, and famously, the Ambassador AoE I kept showing off. But projectile AoEs hate them and lose damage instead of gaining damage, so while it does work on Nidus, I wouldn't recommend it. Literally anomalying them together and launching at their heads vastly outperforms Larva here. Now how about Mag? It works okay, because it's not a ragdoll. You don't really gain noticeable damage unless you use helmet buffs. Its main use here though, on Magnetize, is a persistent bubble that will keep enemy fire away from you. Always launch the Verdilac towards the top of the bubble to make sure it headshots the group of enemies. If you launch it anywhere else, it will body shot and do much less damage when it gets pulled in, as it will only hit once due to not having much punch through. This is the Mag build I'm using. You can replace Streamline with Rolling Guard. Helmet can be whatever you want it, be it Roar, Eclipse, Breach Surge. Honestly, Breach Surge would probably be the best due to the overlapping gas clouds as I mentioned earlier, triggering sparks from all the enemies bunched up together. And lastly, the obvious baits, Mirage. I saved her for last because I think you already know what is going to happen. So, Mirage clones. Only the front two will shoot with you if you're DPSing with guns, but if you're using melee, all 4 of them will swing and use melee interactions. This means every time you launch one Verdilac projectile, all 4 of your clones will also, and you still have access to Eclipse and Breach Surge. I will let your mind run wild on what you can do with this, and that brings us to the end of our massive showcase today. As you can see, Verdilac is insane and completely broken in more ways than one. In my eyes, this is the absolute best whip in the game, the best of the new melees we've gotten in the new war, and also a top tier melee in general. Grab it now, you won't regret it. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like, or better yet, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering all of this new war stuff. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm going to continue dropping tons more new war content in the future. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.